I think there's quite a crisis on reserves, as well as probably in the north as well, in terms of homelessness and overcrowding. And I wondered if you could make some comments about how you think that might or should be addressed, or what the condition is that we have in Canada at present.
Since we began housing on and off reserve in 1968, and we started in Wabasca here in Alberta, we have completed either new homes or drastically renovated homes for a total of about 2,600 homes. But I'm of course only too aware that the total needs are probably very close to what Chief Runn mentioned this morning. I think we are in need, and you might have a better number, Bill, but I would say for on and off reserve, an immediate need for 50,000 homes.
I'm not sure what the number is, but in the north, housing is definitely a crisis. Every year, the funding in Nunavut, for example, doesn't even keep up with the growing need. I mean, it's sometimes spoken about the fact that the Aboriginal populations, and particularly in the north, are the fastest growing communities in the country. Highest birth rate, very large percentage of young people. So if you're trying to get housing in these communities, it's it's very, very difficult. And then there's all the issues that occur from overcrowding, health issues, social issues, and I find it quite shocking that we so compartmentalize things. I think what the chief said about and actually the point about the aircraft is a good one too. Our priorities as a country have not been to address housing issues in a serious way, and that seems to be happening less and less and less. I don't know what the answer is, but a completely different approach is definitely needed. And because in the way that we compartmentalize costs as well, you can see that where there'll be all these social problems that happen, or health problems, like a child in a house in the far north that suffers from asthma or something like that will have to be medevaced to the south at a cost of $40,000, and yet that's not put into the calculations of how we figure out the cost of not having adequate housing. And I think until we start connecting those things together, and it's the same way that that's one of the points I was trying to make in the way that we build housing. So often our social housing, particularly social housing, but you see it in market housing as well, we look at it in terms of the first time upfront cost, instead of also looking at it in terms of the long-term operating costs of buildings. And so until we start connecting these parts together, and until we start seeing, looking at things in a longer-term perspective, I think we're going to continue down the same path. And I think that's part of where our challenge lies. And plus, approaching all these things with a far greater generosity of spirit, which is something that I think is sorely lacking today.
I think austerity is too kind a word here. Am I interrupting? No. I'll tell you, too kind a word to use to describe policy of federal and the eastern provincial governments right now. They say there isn't any money for all the serious promises made at Kelowna to the national Aboriginal leadership, led by Phil Fontaine. $5 billion for housing, health, and education. They say this money doesn't exist. Conservative leaders describe that as a promise written on the back of an envelope or a menu at a restaurant or something, whereas this is totally untrue. That commitment was carefully drafted with all kinds of detail about transparency and accountability. It was a very worthwhile program, and if it had been implemented, there would be a much healthier relationship between Native and non-Native Canadians today. And I would hope that as soon as possible there could be a federal and a provincial government or meeting of governments with the Native leadership prioritizing those very items that have been well obliterated by the Harbour government: housing, health, and education. And although we are just a bravely battling charitable group, I do know that there are so many Canadians in the church, in the corporate and foundations and private sector areas that are willing to help. In that one slide about Lanark, there was just a tiny little kind of slice of what could be done. So many people, just for that one house, helped in the ways they could. I would say 12 different companies in that area all donated supplies for that home. Every electrician donated his time free, and those were electricians from the neighborhood. One particular company, Rideau Lumber in Smith Falls, they went out of their way, not just on that project, but in 2 previous projects in that area, which we kind of deliberately developed right in the Ottawa area, hoping that they would be noticed. Succeeded in completing homes, 2 of which got R2000 certifications, and there was just a good feeling as a result. In one of the projects, the one at Almont, the off-reserve Native family was not really being treated very cordially by the growing subdivision surrounding it. People were offering Steve and Laura Barry to move away so they could pull down their decrepit old shack, which was they considered an eyesore. But enough people cared about the family and what should be done that they pitched in and worked with Steve and Laurie to build a new house. Then pretty soon the neighborhood changed their opinion, and they started helping themselves, and by the end they rejoiced mainly because their property values had gone up, and the inspector recognized our little project there as the best house in the subdivision. But it just shows the potential for action on what should be Canada's #1 need. And I hope I wasn't overspending or overusing my time there, but I do feel it's so important that Canada at last have a Native Governor General. This would be one of the most healing things the government could do. Quebec, for example, thinks that Canada began with Frontenac and Champlain. They don't understand that the Huron and the Algonquin and the Cree people were there 30,000 years ago, and that they graciously shared all their resources and skills about dealing with the cold and the potential for disease, which was also shared with all of the latecomers. So this is why I do hope that at last our government will recognize one of the splendid Native Governor Generals in waiting that are out there.
So I'm sure there are people with questions or comments, so did you want a microphone to run this down?
Hello. Hi, this is for David. I'm really interested in hearing how you guys dealt with the like when people hear the term affordable housing or even seniors housing, the nearby community residents, they feel it's such a negative thing. So like it's gonna bring in crime or traffic, parking. So how did you guys deal with that? Because you guys, like, it's a really urban area in Vancouver. I mean, it's the same thing I see in Edmonton. So I'm really interested how you guys dealt with, I guess, community consultation and how they accepted this project.
Yeah, so that's, that area is really Indian country in the downtown east side, so there weren't those issues.
Oh.
And our building under construction right now at Broadway and Fraser, which is uptown, huge issues. But I won't go into that right now. The building there was really welcomed. And we have a building right beside it. We have a 98-unit building that is right beside it. That's actually why we got that allocation, because of our building that had been there for 12 years. So no real NIMBY issues there.
Oh.
Biggest issues were City of Vancouver bureaucracy. And I'll give you an example. We had a fight with the heritage planner because we have a 100-year-old brick facade that we retained. So the old front structure of the building, everything behind that is new concrete. So on top of that 4-story facade, we put our longhouse, or 2-story longhouse, and the 40-foot pole. And the heritage planner didn't want us to have that longhouse and pole as close to the Victorian facade as we did. And we argued for 3.5 months and he wouldn't budge. So I finally had to write a letter to the city manager and asked her if she thought perhaps 6,000-year-old Aboriginal heritage trumped 150-year-old Victorian heritage, and maybe she'd like to mitigate some of the wrongs that have been done to Aboriginal people since the last 125 years that Vancouver's been in existence. And she totally agreed. And so 5 minutes after she called me, and I was in Ottawa at the time, and it was in the evening, the chief planner, Brent Todderan, called me and said, "We want to work with you on this building. We want to help you co-design this building." So all of a sudden, they were our best friends. So the bureaucracy, the planning departments, the legal department is the worst. The social development department, of course, is great, but it's absolutely brutal. I don't know what it's like in Edmonton, but in Vancouver, most of our delays come from the city bureaucratic processes.
I work for planning with the city.
Anybody else? Just behind you.
Questions for Bill. In reference to your last example, the building or the home with the sod roof, you mentioned wastewater treatment, water treatment was incorporated. Can you elaborate on that and exactly what that was? And because that's typically a difficult thing to deal with in remote areas.
Yeah, it is a difficult thing. I don't remember exactly what type of equipment was put in. It was equipment, it was a system that was tested out at the center in Fairbanks. And interestingly enough, this is a very interesting issue because this community in Anaktuvik Pass actually has a sewer system, and we could have hooked up to it. The reason we didn't is when we looked at the price of what it cost to put this system in, I mean, it was an astronomical amount of money. It was absolutely a spectacular amount. It was kind of like on the amount that, you know, it would have been cheaper to fly every family to the Caribbean and have them live on a sailboat than it cost to put this thing in. So we decided, and this is a big issue in the communities, and so we decided that, you know, we needed to start looking at something that was an alternative to these very expensive centralized systems that, again, are designed, you know, for a southern climate and not for, you know, an Arctic location. And so this system was put in, and all indications are is that it's working quite well. And I could get you some information on it. Unfortunately, I just off the top of my head, I'm the architect and building end, and there was another part of our team that took part of that end. I mean, and that's an interesting thing about this story, and it is a really interesting story of doing this project, because because the CCHRC is an NGO rather than the government. You know, we were able to work on this project the same way we would work as if we were going into, say, a remote community in a developing country as an NGO, where we would think of every part of the project and have someone from the team who was always there to make sure that something got put in well, something got maintained well, the proper training was carried out, etc., etc. So, I mean, for us, it was a really, really interesting thing to do. And so we thought of this house as a system as well, and that's why we put that in, and because we wanted to begin to address some of the waste and water treatment issues and the colossal amount that they're costing in northern communities. All indications I hear is that it's working quite well, and I can get some information for you.
Yeah, I would love some. Would you say that the system could be replicated or repeated almost anywhere?
I'm not sure if I'm authority to answer that, but that was the idea. The idea was to put this in so that this could be used in other remote Alaskan communities. And this community was 100 miles from the Arctic Ocean. So this was the coldest community in Alaska. So we felt that anything that we could make work there would work other places. Now, notwithstanding, like that building system that we built there was for that community. We've done projects in other communities too, and the whole building system's been dramatically different. And often that's been the result of how we could get materials in. You know, the transportation system always has, and it's that way all across the north. You know, whether it's sea lift or winter ice road, or if you're on a road, or if you're an air access only community, like Old Crow in the Yukon is very similar to Anaktuvik Pass, because both of them are fly-in communities, and so the issues of getting materials in and how you do it and the cost and everything there's a great similarity. So it's always something to consider. And as an architect, as a designer, to be thinking, okay, you've got your cultural and performance criteria, but transportation is always a criteria, always in the north.
I liked all the presentations I saw today. I'm involved in training at Blue Quills, First Nations College in St. Paul. We're involved in training in timber building, log building, or timber frame. A number of things come to mind when I look at the building projects. All the projects I saw today were innovative. Some were high-tech and some were not. The problems of building in the north probably demanded a high-tech solution. When I look at building in different areas, the first thing I think of is building with materials that are appropriate to the area, that are in abundance, and that somehow fit the scene. So I've worked all over Canada. When I'm working in BC, timber is a resource that's in great abundance, and it makes a lot of sense to build in timber. And there's parts of Alberta where it's abundant also, and makes good sense to use it there. In the prairies, we're building with timber, and it's often somewhat difficult for us to get. A material that we're overlooking completely, and that's low cost, is clay and straw. Many people are building in a modern way with these two abundant materials that are sometimes viewed as a waste product. So right now, while we're building with timber, the future might indicate that we should be looking at those materials, and in other areas of the country would be the same thing. What material is abundant in your area? What can you work with that's at hand and doesn't have a lot of transportation cost involved, and that local labor could learn in a very quick way and use relatively cheap tools to use. The other thing that strikes me in housing in remote areas and in any Aboriginal community, I've talked with many people over the years about it, is that as a trainer, it would be my desire that the impetus would come from within the community, the desire for a project, and that a plan was put in place, a long-term plan, and that the labor and the drive for that project would come from within the community and not from without. And in addition to that, that I was just thinking of something there, I forgot. That these projects would be sustainable in the long run. So what I saw today was some one-off projects that were spectacular, but what's the repeatability of it? And that would be part of the long-term plan. So I saw lots of great projects, particularly Mr. Catto's projects there that were widespread across the country, and a beautiful example in each community. And I guess my question there would be, once you leave the community, is there a drive to keep reproducing those projects? And I'll just end it with that.
I think and the art gallery model dovetail very nicely together in terms of a unique Aboriginal project, and I think it's portable right across the country. I think Edmonton would be a great place for the next one, and right on down through Winnipeg, Calgary, certainly Ottawa, Montreal. There's a unique need and I think a unique opportunity to brag about the culture, to make people aware, and to just add that vibrant piece to the community that is certainly missing in most of the country.
I could add a little more to those comments. I mentioned the Kitkisakic project in Quebec, where we've been busy for nearly 4 years there. There were 26 new homes now completed in that community, but also there will be 15 Algonquin carpenters certified probably in April or May. So this standing tree to standing home activity that we've been promoting does result in not only good housing news, but the certification in construction trades of the people in the community themselves, so that they can not only maintain their own homes, but build more homes in the community and also go out in the mainstream and get jobs as skilled tradesmen. So we're very mindful of that. And at Garden Hill in Manitoba too, that's where we had the strongest numbers in completed training, and we're using the Red River College curriculum there for that activity. And so I hope this is a bit of an answer to your question.
It's a very complex question, and there are many points on our you know, right on the mark, and it raises all sorts of also questions about, you know, what sustainability is in that particular area. For example, in Nunavut, you know, and I mean, I'm a supporter of building out straw houses and of different sorts of, you know, rammed earth and earth block houses and different things like that. The challenge in the Arctic has been, you know, that there aren't the materials, there isn't even soil, and so it's been difficult to build something like that. And then there's the challenge on top of that of, I'm just sharing with you some of the challenges I've had to experience and see. In some areas, for example, where, and I've had discussions with lots of people who build log houses and timber frame and things like that. And when you look at doing a house like that, say somewhere like Dawson City in the Yukon, a community that has, you know, 8,500 degree heating days and a design temperature of minus 40. It's very different than designing even on the, and building on the prairie. So you can build a log building there, but if you were building a building there and then you were a building like that, but then you were heating it using imported oil, and the amount of oil that would take, you know, you're in a sort of, if you're heating it, you're living in a traditional lifestyle out on the edge of town or in the bush or even in town, and you're going out and cutting all your wood for heating that, it's a different story than if you're importing oil. And we've had conversations in these communities you know, about this all the time, and about, you know, what that means, because there is a tremendous concern with the long-term, you know, energy security of communities in the north, both in terms of how much it costs to heat, and in terms of, you know, the oil that could be available in the future. And so, you know, you're trying to find a way to address all these particular things. And in terms of your point about actually each one of these buildings has been done with the community, and the idea is that the community has been building other ones, that they've been following up on the process. So you're seeing the first one, and there's ones that have followed these. I think as a model, a far more successful model would be, in terms of my involvement, was if I was involved with a team of people that could go in and keep repeating and help with the training and help with the establishment and make sure everything was in place, which is what we did in Anaktuvik Pass, but that was done by a research organization that was an NGO. You know, the government doesn't allow me to do that. You know, they see, oh, you go and do one project, it's been a success, oh, it's done. So, you know, and it's not a successful model, but it's the model that I have had to work with. It's not a model I want to continue working with. So, anyway, I hope that answers some of it. I just think that this is a very long conversation, and a very interesting one, and a very complex one, because it also raises the very question of what sustainability is when it comes to buildings, somewhere where, in fact, the vast majority of communities have no materials that are locally that they can use to build. And that places a whole other, that, you know, changes the game completely. If you're not on the prairie where you even have straw, you don't have it. It doesn't exist. And so what that means, when people were moved from, you know, this was happening in the 50s and 60s, and even as recently as the early 70s, many of these people were nomadic people. Like I work with elders who were born out on the land. And so in a generation, you know, in a couple of generations, it's changed to people who are used to living in houses and living in communities now, and materials that have been imported. And so how do you start to, you know, make a change within that? It's very, very complex and an extremely challenging place to work. Far more challenging than anything I've ever addressed in the South. Multifaceted. And
I think we have time for just one quick question.
How can I get started on getting you to come design houses in our communities? I've heard a lot of stuff, but I haven't heard how can I start doing this. To get someone like CMHC does the housing for our community, which is Fort Chipewyan, Alberta. Isolation, all the criteria is fit. We have materials and stuff there that can possibly be utilized, but it's not. We have a diesel power plant in the area that we use to power the area, but We have solar that's very strong. None of this stuff has been done in the last, since never. It's not done. So my question now is, how can we get started by doing this and moving into that? Because everything I've heard today, I'm convinced. So.
Unfortunately, I won't be able to assist you from CMHC because, as I mentioned, I'm departing. I mean, part of the reason I am is because it's become more and more difficult in the circumstance to carry out this kind of work, and I want to continue doing that. You know, I'm available to work with communities, so we can talk, and maybe there's some way of working something out. But I'm going to be continually doing this kind of work, and using all the experience that I have, and with building systems and technologies and design, and also how to facilitate and work with communities. So let's talk more. You know, maybe it's possible to work something. That's the best I can offer. I mean, I hate to say it, but that, I mean, that's. I'm going to be a consultant rather than a government employee now, and I'm not here to market myself. But yeah. But anyway, let's talk afterwards, okay?
Charles, did you have a task to have Frontiers Foundation?
If we had the time, we might be able to recruit another Richard Isaac type person. It sounds as if it's somebody like Richard that you're looking for, a capability to address your need for a range of design possibilities, including not only site plans but the whole wider plan for the development of the whole community. Is that maybe have we got that right? This is what you're needing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I guess it is kind of like that. A lot of northern communities, I guess, they're in the same boat. It's hard to get materials there to fly in, fly out. We have an ice road. With climate change happening, ice roads ain't going to last as long as they do. So we were going to have possibly, like, within 2 months of the year to start hauling stuff up there by road. Everything else has to be flown in. So we're going to into a situation where having a diesel power plant is not going to be a smart thing to have there if we're going to be flying in fuel all the time. So these things have to change in the next few years. You know, there might be a time where we're not going to be able to have an ice road at all. So everything's going to have to be either flown in or designing roads to drive over miles and miles of delta. So we'd be building probably the biggest bridge in Canada if we were to have a road into our community. So it's not just us, like it's up there, and then it's succeeded already in where the permafrost is up there. Like your story is a success story. So how, again, I guess, is how do we get started on doing that? And I'm pretty sure everybody's thinking about the same thing. You know, how can we do that? Where do I apply? And do I have to get you guys to come volunteer to do that in order to do it? Or, like he mentioned how the government subsidies were disappearing. Is it going to happen for us too? I mean, a lot of questions there.
Well, there are a lot of questions, and I'm not sure if the solution will exist over the next while in the government. I mean, the reality is that there are cutbacks all over the place, and you know, it's not a rosy picture right now. It just isn't. Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot of things that I could help you with. And there's a lot of things in terms of planning and things like that I could help you with as well, because I've been working with northern communities that are doing that stuff also. Mention that I'm an architect. My first degree is actually in planning, and I was a builder for a number of years as well. So I have a variety of skills that I've been applying to the work that I've been doing, as well as and you know, interestingly enough, I'm actually. You saw my address up there. One of my email addresses is the University of Alberta, so I spend a certain amount of time out here because I'm doing some work on a PhD, which is on the design process of working with communities. So I've actually been thinking about and designing a process for working with remote communities that is, I think, far more suited to how, you know, Indigenous communities communicate, how people communicate, how the whole circumstance operates politically. And I think a lot of the problems that have occurred with people coming in from the outside, and is that of not understanding that they're coming and working in somewhere where there's a different set of rules and a different set of social order, a different set of ways of being gracious, you know, and those are things I've given a lot of thought to and tried different things out to see what works and what doesn't work. It's a learning process, and it's one that's been very enjoyable for me. So anyway, I'd be happy to talk with you. Let's see what we can come up with.